To finish up our lecture on Western Europe during the Middle Ages, we would be remiss if we didn't go into detail regarding feudalism. Feudalism, in terms of its definition, is a system of land holding and governing that is based on mutual obligations. Okay, so each side has to do something for the other person. Now, at first, it starts out as mutually beneficial, but eventually it is going to end up benefiting the people at the top of society, the people that are higher in that feudal system, including the lords and the dukes and the counts. So under feudalism, you have people taking oaths of loyalty. So that's what's being depicted here. Oaths of loyalty or fealty to a lord or a king, which makes you his vassal. So here we see knights taking the oath of loyalty. Now, feudalism did benefit the manor as a whole in that it cut down on losses to robbers and bandits. So at first it was mutually beneficial. And also the knights benefited from it because they were provided with their equipment in order to become knights, in order to undergo that training and to follow that code of chivalry. Also, so the agricultural surplus was enough for the towns and the manors, for the population that lived in those towns and manors, but the agricultural surplus was not enough to feed sprawling urban centers. So this is why in Western Europe during the Dark Ages, you see that there's decreased city population because they don't have the agriculture to back it up to supply food for a city of that size, contrary to what we would see in Novgorod with almost 500,000 people, or in the giant cities in the Islamic Caliphate, or in Tang, China. Okay, they don't have the ability to feed such a large population. So under feudalism, you're going to see the social hierarchy again. There can only be one king, and then he has lords or counts or dukes that he has granted a land to. So this is based on land ownership. That is the form of wealth that we are focusing on in this time period. And so he would give that land to his lords, which would make them his vassals. And then in exchange, they're supposed to give him soldiers or knights from their personal armies whenever he had to declare war against somebody. So like, say for instance, in declaring war against the Islamic Caliphate in the Battle of Tours, the king, Charles Martel, would call upon his lords or his vassals who he had given land, known as fiefs. He would say, hey, I gave you land, you owe me, give me soldiers. And they would say, bet. So the lords gave fiefs or land to the knights and to their counts and dukes in exchange for military service, whereas the peasants, who made up the majority of the population, worked the land. And most of these people are going to be serfs. So serfs are tied to the land. They cannot leave the manor, not without permission from the lord. They can't get married without permission from the lord. Their entire lives are dictated by the lord whose land they are working on. Now, at first, this was mutually beneficial in that the peasants work on the land and give that agricultural surplus to the lord in exchange for protection. So protection against bandits or robbers or invasion, like from the Magyars. But in the end, this ends up benefiting the lords much more because they benefit economically off of that surplus, whereas the serfs are tied to the land and they end up paying tribute through their labor or their crops. And they don't really have much bargaining power in terms of, oh, I'm just going to leave and find another job that pays better. Well, no, they're tied to the land. Legally, they are not allowed to leave. And if their lord sells the land that the serf is working on or living on, then they work for whoever bought the land. So it's not slavery in the sense of you can buy the serfs, but it is a form of forced or coerced labor that puts the serfs at the bad end of the deal and benefits the people at the top, the people who own land and have power. So in this manorial system, the manor is the lord's estate. So these local lords are able to establish law and order, and their power was absolute power. Because what are you going to do? If your lord says this is the law, and then you're like, I disagree with that, who are you going to report to? Are you going to call up on the king? No, you're not. The king's not going to listen to you. So whatever your lord said you had to do, you had to do it. So their power was absolute. Now, the manorial system was self-sufficient. So as we see here, it would have a church, so you didn't need to leave the manor in order to get your sacraments. They would have a blacksmith, a mill, presses, homes for the serfs, and so serfs would often never leave their manor. Oftentimes, they would never go more than 25 miles beyond where they were born, because everything that you needed was produced on site. It was produced on this manor. What the peasants get out of this system, the Lord would provide them with housing and protection. In exchange for that protection, the serfs would have to work on the land and maintain the manor and make sure it's nice. So that's what we see here in this picture, with the serfs working the land. And then up here is the castle, or the manor where the Lord would live. They were bound to the land, so if their land got sold, they would have to work for whoever owned that land. And despite having very little money and very little capital, they had to pay high amounts of taxes. So just like what we saw in the Byzantine Empire, where the nobles in power often have positions in the government, or they have clout with the king. And so when it comes time to raise taxes, the nobles are going to say, don't raise it on us. We have an army of knights. We will revolt if you raise taxes on us. Even though they have the most money because they have land and they don't technically work or labor for that surplus. The serfs do. So despite the fact that they make very, very low money, actually no money because they're in the bartering system, the serfs still had to pay a high amount of taxes. And they live in very harsh conditions. When we talk about the house that they live on the manor, we're not talking like a castle like this. We're talking about a wooden hut with a dirt floor, one room. The entire family lives within that one room, sometimes even with their animals, with their farm animals in the room with them. So very, very harsh conditions and a strict class system, much like what we saw in the caste system in India. There is not a lot of room for upward social mobility. Now, in terms of what else the peasants did on the manor, they did work on a 3-field system, which was a farming technique that allowed them to maximize their crops. So in one field, you would have crops that provide food, and then in another field, you would have crops that provide nitrogen to replenish the soil. And then the third field would lie fallow, meaning it is unused land, in order to allow the land to replenish itself and to gain back some of those nutrients that were taken up by the crop that was grown there previously that provided food. So they would rotate these fields out in order to maximize their output. Also, in terms of maximizing agricultural output, you have technology. So windmills, wind would turn the mill, and then that mill would crush the wheat or the barley or whatever to make into flour, instead of having human labor do that. Heavier plows, so they would be made of metal instead of wood, and so they could dig deeper into the ground in order to plow the earth before putting the seeds in it. They also had a horse collar, which made it easier for the horse to pull the plow without having it push into their neck and wear the horse out, so the horse could plow the field for longer. And also stirrups came from the east, which allowed the rider of the horse to stay on that horse more easily. Now in the next section, we're going to talk about the Crusades. So I would recommend that you watch this video in Schoology, but we're going to go ahead and do a review ourselves. So what were the Crusades about? Well, they were over the Holy Land. The Holy Land is in Palestine, which is in the Middle East. The Seljuk Turks had taken over the Holy Land in 1071, and as a result, cause and effect, they reduced Christian access to Jerusalem, to the Holy Lands. Remember that Holy Land, Jerusalem, is holy to the Muslims, it's holy to the Jews, and it's holy to the Christians. So this really ticked off, guess who? The Pope, the head of the Catholic Church. So if we're going to look at causation, let's look at causes of the Crusades. Social causes. Remember, we need to categorize. In terms of social causes, you have primogeniture. Primogeniture is when the eldest son inherits all of the land or inherits everything from their father. And so what that means is if you're a noble and you have more than one son, well, when you die, everything goes to your first son, but then what do you have left over for the second son? Nothing. And so that second son is going to be very restless. So you have a lot of restless nobles on the prowl, trying to make their name. They don't inherit anything, so they may become a knight, and that knight could help fight in the Crusades. You also have unemployed peasants. And they didn't have a lot of bargaining power because they were basically free labor. I mean, in exchange for letting them sleep in a hut on your land, you can get peasants or serfs to do whatever you wanted. And so you have a lot of people who are low in the social scale. And when you have an overpopulation, that means a higher level of unemployment. So you have peasants roaming the countryside and they're hungry and they're out of work. And so they're going to resort to stealing in order to survive. So you have restless nobles going around causing trouble because they don't have enough to do. And then unemployed peasants also causing trouble. In terms of economic causes, merchants want access to the trade routes in the Middle East. That access has been cut off by the Seljuk Turks. So wouldn't it be nice if a European military could go in and take it over so that merchants could have access to those trade routes? And then finally, religious causes, which may seem obvious. The Orthodox Patriarch of the Byzantine Empire implored or appealed to Pope Urban II for help. And remember, the Seljuk Turks were not only taking over land in Asia Minor, they were also trying to invade Constantinople, which was the capital city of the Byzantine Empire. It's where the emperor of the Byzantine Empire lived, and the patriarch was picked by the emperor. And so the patriarch is going to say, hey, Pope, you're Christian, we're Christian. We've had our fights in the past, but we're kind of basically the same religion, right? How about you help us out against the Seljuk Turks, who are a different religion? They're Islamic. And so the Pope said, okay. But in addition to wanting to preserve Christianity from invasions of the Seljuk Turk, you also have political reasons for the Pope getting involved. There were tensions between the political rulers and the Pope and the power of the church in terms of who is supposed to have more power. So the secular rulers, the nobles, want more authority and they want to take it from the Pope. And the Pope is like, how about instead I distract you with a series of holy wars in order to take back the Holy Land. And he also promised that if you fight in this holy war, you get a one-way ticket to heaven when you die. And can he do that? Well, he's the Pope. He can do what he wants. Okay, whatever he holds on earth, God will hold up in heaven. And so a lot of people take him up on his word of, if I go and fight in these crusades, and I automatically get into heaven. Okay, so that's also going to be a big religious factor. Now that we're done talking about causes, let's talk about effects of the crusade. Number one, you're going to have an increased demand for goods from the East. Think of all the luxury goods that are being traded out of Asia and out of the Middle East and through the Saharan Desert. Everywhere else in the world is having a golden age. And so when the Crusaders go over and they see all these innovations, they're like, yeah, I want to kind of take that back home. So number one, demand for goods that they see from the golden ages of these other empires. Number two, you have the spread of the plague. Remember, that is also an aspect of cultural diffusion. The Mongols are going to spread it through conquest, but also you're going to see the spread of the bubonic plague spread through trade routes, established trade routes, and the Crusades. And so as a result, approximately 1/4 to 1/3 of the European population is going to die. So as a result of that bubonic plague, so cause and effect from that, decreased population, and that decreased population leads to decreased economic activity. Can't farm crops in order to sell them at market if all of the serfs are dead. So decreased population leads to decreased economic activity, but it's also going to kill off a lot of the serfs, which means fewer serfs to work the land, which means that they have more bargaining power. There are fields that are left unfarmed because there aren't people to farm them. And so when the serfs are getting hired in order to work on these fiefs, they're going to say, well, I know that you need me. And so instead of giving you 90% of the crops that I grow, I'll only work for you if you take a 75% cut. Right? And so the nobles are going to find that they lack that bargaining power. And so the serfs see an increase in their rights and their treatment. Also, that you're going to see an increase in revolts by the peasants as they fight against the feudal system. Also, an effect of the Crusades is an increased interest in Greco-Roman culture. And what does that lead to? You guessed it, the Renaissance. Increased interest in Greco-Roman culture leads to the rebirth of Greco-Roman culture, or the Renaissance, taking Western Europe out of their dark ages. Also, with the deaths from the bubonic plague, you're going to see a shakeup in the social system. So you see the development of the burgher class, which is just middle class, also known as the bourgeoisie. Also a fun word to spell and to say, bourgeoisie. So you see the development of a middle class. The nobles are losing power, and you start seeing a middle class develop as a result of the Crusades. And that's where we're going to end our lecture for Western Europe. I would highly recommend watching the John Green video on the Crusades, as well as the Khan Academy videos that I've linked for you if you have any further questions about feudalism or the Middle Ages.